Born ready.
Okay, well, first of all, congratulations.
Appreciate it.
On your incredible heater of a memoir. Yeah, before I ask more hard-hitting questions, where did that come from?
Absolute heater of a memoir?
Yeah.
My editor, Jordan Ginsburg, he was tweeting about it. And I guess he was tweeting about books he had edited that were coming out. And one of his tweets about my memoir said, "It should not surprise you that Morgan Campbell has written an absolute heater of a memoir." So now if you guys are on Twitter, my name on Twitter is Morgan Absolute Heater of a Memoir Campbell.
I love it. Like, it's just such a, it's a very sportsy thing to
Yes.
say. It's very fitting for you. So, you are just a renowned sports journalist, and friends of mine.
Sort of, but if I were more renowned, I would be a lot better paid, or would have been a lot better paid before I left the Toronto Star.
I mean, you say
I
that,
see your point.
But the state of journalism
Yes.
being what it is,
Yes.
it seems like, there isn't actually any money to pay renowned sports journalists anymore.
None.
So, you pivoted to the lucrative industry of
We're all out
publishing.
here writing books and setting up Substacks. That's what we do.
How long has this one been sitting in your heart?
Ooh, good question. Honestly, summer of 2013, I was just bored at work because I'd gotten kicked out of the sports department. I had a really bad boss. And in sports, he and I
Name him.
Oh, John Filson.
All right.
I'm not ashamed
Yeah.
to name it because he had no problem trying to kneecap me, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not afraid of him. What's he gonna do?
Yeah, no.
I ain't got a job. I'm a writer.
Write a counter memoir.
What's he gonna do? Fire me from writing?
You're like, I did not like Morgan, a memoir.
Exactly. Anyway, so he ran me out of the sports department. I had a couple years in the business department at the Star, and I was just bored. So I started taking a creative writing class on Wednesday nights at was Ryerson back then. Now it's Toronto Metropolitan University. And some of the essays, they were just little 500-word essays you would write every Wednesday. And some of them are not fully formed in this. They're not in this book in their original form, but they did provide the inspiration for some of these chapters. So like the Full Speed Ahead chapter was one of those essays. The Operation chapter came from one of those essays. Equipment for Living, like the scene where, I don't know if you all have read the book yet, but the scene where my dad gets into the stare down with the Fruit of Islam security guard outside Louis Farrakhan's house. That was one of those essays. But but back then I was just taking the class just because I was bored. I had not a lot to do in the summer, and I just wanted a summer project. And then I really started thinking seriously about it probably 2019, and then I took that buyout from the Star at the end of 2019. Did the proposal for the book, and we were off and running.
Okay, well, tell me about the
Talk
process.
about.
Yes, no,
Is that a talk about question?
Talk about. Well, no, there's a tell me about.
Because inside joke. Because we're both sports journalists, and we were just talking in the green room about how sick we are of other sports journalists that just don't ask questions. They just stick a mic in someone's face and say, "Talk about pitching," and they just expect the person to say something witty. Anyway,
Tell me about pitching your book. No, no. Like, tell me about the writing process for you. How did it go? What did you do? I mean, and the reason I ask is because like my writing process is fraught and difficult, and
Yes.
I get weird, and I forget to moisturize. And, like, I don't want anyone to look at me, and it'll be like I don't want anyone to look at me at my house, but then like if I'm on the bus, it's like don't perceive me, like I'm in my little cocoon of feelings for a while. So I'm wondering about how it was for you.
I didn't have all that, but I mean, one of the big differences between writing on deadline and writing something like this is that when you're a sports writer, and you covered hockey, so you've done all these games on deadline. I covered soccer for a couple years, did a couple seasons Major League covering the Blue Jays. I've covered a lot of the fights like on deadline, and your job is just to write something readable very quickly. And you can strengthen those muscles and write some really, most nights it's not great, but you can write some really good stories on a tight deadline. But this is something completely different, and it uses a completely different set of mental muscles. Mm-hmm. So I said all that to say this: when you write on deadline, you get good at writing readable stuff first draft. And if you're lucky, you get a write through, and then you can really make it sing. Whereas these essays here, like first draft, I would not show anyone. And the only reason I didn't put it like straight into the fireplace is because I needed the first draft to make the second draft, which I still would not show anyone. And it wasn't until probably 2.5 drafts in that I got comfortable even like typing it like on a computer.
Oh, wow.
So the first 1.5 drafts, first draft for sure. Usually the second draft would just be longhand.
Whoa.
100%.
That's a very old thing to admit. I'm just like writing longhand in
Yes,
the first draft.
but
Makes you seem very old.
I am very old. I was born in the 1970s.
Our kids are the same age. I feel like. Are you
But-
that old, really?
Yeah, so it's a different process in that from that standpoint, and that's before you get into the subject matter, right? So this book, like, you know, there are a lot of jokes in the book. The book, you know, it is meant to be funny, and there are some like one of the somebody that had reviewed the book on Instagram, and she was saying like some chapter she didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and like.
That's the point.
So if you find yourself reading the chapter where my dad's mom robs his apartment after his death,
Oh, such a fascinating moment.
but don't feel bad about laughing about things in that chapter because those things are supposed to be funny,
Yeah.
right? Like when I write about how like all these insults my mom comes up with, the way my mom would talk trash about people. During a really heavy moment in the book, but it's okay to laugh about that. Like, if you can't laugh when my mom is like, you must be out of your ever-loving black and fuzzy mind. Like, that's, laugh.
Yeah,
That's funny.
that was the biggest laugh for me, just because that's a really funny thing to say.
Yeah. Listen, my mom came up, that was like spontaneous, how my mom came up with that. But anyway, to the point, when you're writing like heavy stuff though, like we were talking about backstage, like you got to go to a place mentally and emotionally to deal with this stuff. It's a place you ain't got to go when you're writing about Aaron Hill winning the Silver Slugger. You know what I'm saying? So it was a very different process than what I was used to.
I had a million questions actually about that moment where your grandma robs your dad's apartment.
Well, there was not a moment where she robbed the apartment. It was only the moment where we discovered she robbed the apartment.
Yes.
I did not actually witness the robbery.
Yeah, like I want to know like how planned it was, you know, and you kind of talked about like, well, you know, she must have like rented a van and like had movers and yeah, I thought about it because you know, my biological mom died a couple of years ago, and before she died, she had gone out and bought a bunch of weird pieces of furniture that didn't fit in her house, and, I went over there and you know, I was looking at this furniture, like, well, what are you gonna do with all this furniture? This
She
is
was
weird.
here in Vancouver?
Yeah, she was living in Langley.
Okay.
You know, I don't know if you're familiar. I know, like your
No.
book, you have a geographic mind. Like you'll talk about like neighborhoods and streets and bus routes.
That's also because I'm the son of 2 Chicagoans, and Chicago is a city of neighborhoods. The way I describe Chicago is it's a country unto itself, and each neighborhood is like a state. But
yeah,
I digress. So you're telling me.
I go out to Langley. She's got all this weird furniture, and I'm like, you know, this doesn't fit in your house. What are you doing? And she's like, oh, this is all for you after I die, right? So she had bought this like
Wow.
weird thing, but she had bought this like circular ottoman that folded out into a dinner table. Like it was so strange, and you know, it was like tufted and like pleather. But you know, I had started to imagine how I could fit this into my house because like I have so few things from my biological mother that like anything she gives me, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna cherish
Listen,
it.
the circular ottoman that folds out into a dinner table sounds.
That's functional, you
Yeah.
know, and you know, like I rearrange my house like every few days.
Yeah.
Like I need the dopamine that comes from new angles and stuff.
Yeah.
So you know, this was you know, just highly modular, and it seemed like, oh, she really sees me with this. But then after she died, I went back to the house, and I didn't realize that that was a thing that happens. Like people just cleaned it out. Right, so like the ottoman was gone, and like I had given her like a sweater to wear while she was in the hospital. And,
Yeah.
like, that was gone, and yeah, so it brought me back to this moment, like.
Yeah, but the thing is, ideally, it's not a thing that people do, right?
Yeah, it seems like maybe everybody does this. Next time somebody close to me dies, like I'm breaking in and taking everything.
Well, again, especially with my dad's mom, like that was just the way she thought, the way she saw people, right? Is if I do something for you, you owe me.
Your red leather recliner.
Right. Anything I've done for you, you owe me, and I'm gonna remember that I've done something for you, so I can remind you of it later. But that's also why she would tell my sisters and I, "Oh, I'm spending you all's inheritance," because she thought that we thought like she thought. That I'm just looking at people in my family, kind of sizing them up. Ooh, what am I gonna take when they croak? Like, for my sisters and I, that was never a thought, but because that's how she thought, she figured that's how everybody thinks.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's very similar to like when you know someone that lies a lot and they just think everyone else is a liar because they're a liar. So she's like, well, when people in my family, when they croak, I'm coming to get your stuff. So I know y'all looking at me coming to get my stuff. Sorry, I'm spending your inheritance. It's like,
yeah, it didn't feel like out of character for the whole family in your book. Like it just seems like, your family, I mean, my fighting family, when I saw that, it was like, okay, maybe everyone's a boxer, but like kinda, like everybody's so fighty. As somebody who is deathly afraid of conflict, the number of feuds and grudges and fist fights. Oh my God. Like I was in a fist fight one time.
And for people who have not read it, the fist fights do not break out between members of our family. There are just fist fights. It's like a movie where like a fight scene keeps the movie moving.
Yes.
Right?
There's a lot of fight scenes in this. Yeah, no, it blew me away. I have a friend who, his son is the same age as our kids, and if somebody like pushes him, he'll come running to his dad, and then his dad will be like, "Why are you running to me for?"
Yeah,
you better go hit him back.
Yes.
You're like, "Well, he's 5. Like, what do you? Don't tell him to hit him back." But like now his son has gotten really good at like, you push me, I'm gonna hit you really hard.
My daughter's 4.5, and that's what I tell her.
What?
They touch you. Hit him back.
Yeah, see, I'm raising cowards.
And then she says, but I'll get in trouble with the teachers. And I say, but you won't get in trouble with me.
I mean, okay, as a black dad, I gotta ask you, like that advice, like, don't you worry that that's gonna get your kids into like outsized trouble?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, well, how come? What makes you think it won't? Talk to me about what makes you think it won't.
You want the bigger picture?
Yes.
If I listened to white people and acted like the type of Negro white people want me to be, the hell would I be right now? Don't make trouble. Just wait for your opportunity. It's okay. Don't advocate for it. It's okay. Just wait. Be quiet. Be meek. Sorry. Be humble. Don't promote yourself. Don't. Lest we think you're arrogant. You're quite arrogant. You're full of yourself. Goddamn right I'm full of myself because I'm better than him, and her. Right? And so just because white people tell you as a black person that they want you to comport yourself a certain way does not mean that it's in your best interest to act that way. So they could tell my kids, oh, don't hit back when people hit you. Look, man, you can't reason with a bully, right? But you know what a bully understands is getting punched in the nose. You know what's the best way to make a bully stop bullying you? Can I swear? Yes. Where's Jorge? Jorge?
We want to swear. Can we swear?
Can I swear? Of course. What's the best way to make a bully stop bullying you is punch that motherfucker in the nose.
Just gonna get a glass of water after that.
But you read my book. You get a sense of who my parents were.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, reading your book, I was struck by how different our upbringings were. I mean, yeah, and if anyone here has read them both, I'm sure you know they're really different.
Even though like the covers look, they complement each other.
Yeah, yeah.
very well.
I was going to ask you about that. We'll come back to that because I want to know when you stole my cover design. But yeah, no, I mean, in my family, I'm adopted. It was a white family, and it was like, lay low, like you are arrogant.
Yes.
Don't hit back. And if I did, if I pushed back, then the punishment for me was always just so much greater than
Yes.
whatever was happening. There's a story in my book where a bully punches me, like I swallow my tooth, and then I'm like standing there bleeding from the mouth.
Yes.
And he goes to the recess monitor, and the recess monitor comes over like, he said you were acting arrogant. And you're like, I'm bleeding from the mouth right now.
You're in trouble anyway.
Yeah?
So you might as well punch the guy.
Wow. It's true, I probably should have. Yeah, I mean, I was also just like, it seems like, you had a family that gave you that kind of advice, and that was like, stand up for yourself, push back. And as somebody who was raised by white folks, there was none of that. There was also no sense of like, hey, you're gonna be a black man in the world here. Like, you gotta be a little stronger, maybe. So like I was blown away by your story because your whole family is black. I was like, whoa, right? That's what normally happens. Like I was thinking a lot about like even both of our books have a moment where we read The Fire Next Time.
Yes.
I mean, for me, like I was 16, 17, and it changed my life because I had never heard anybody say that kind of stuff before, or had anybody tell me like, hey, like your experience is true, you know? So this is a talk about, like, tell me, like what James Baldwin meant to you then, what he means to you now.
Let me work backwards, because the social media era, especially post George Floyd, has really led to this renewed interest in James Baldwin, because when you read James Baldwin, like so many of these anecdotes, these stories he tells, they lead up and they culminate like in these really punchy one-liners.
Yeah, he's like a cool internet dad now, like Jeff Goldblum.
So you see a lot of these James Baldwin quotes, and it'll be like superimposed over a picture of him like with like cognac in this hand and a cigarette in that hand,
Just doing that thing he does.
Yes.
Very cross-legged, just
right.
Like,
But like and that makes me happy, right? That the youngsters in between listening to like Ice Spice and whatever have rediscovered James Baldwin, right? Maybe there's some hope. But at the same time, my hope is that people discover Baldwin, rediscover Baldwin, explore Baldwin above and beyond all these punchy one-liners, because he's not a like a Twitter genius.
No.
It just happens that a lot of his one-liners work well on Twitter and Instagram or whatever. So in that sense, again, I'm heartened that people have sort of rediscovered him. And then for me, again, one of the one thing it did for me is that reading The Fire Next Time, where he really explores in depth, in detail, what it meant to turn 14 in Harlem, and start to add things up and figure out that, like, if you don't have a hustle, a gimmick, a lever to sort of pole vault you up out of the ghetto, like, you got to settle in for a long, disappointing, unfulfilling life, because this is what society has set up for you. And he was harping about turning 14. I read that at 15, and I was like, ooh, looks like I'm behind schedule. But one of the things it did do was, like, it gave me a bit of a deadline, and started to put my life on a schedule. And so, like, I was sort of dabbling in sports then, and I wasn't really thinking about becoming a writer just then, but it got me deeper into reading. I was already reading. I was reading, like, Sports Illustrated, but it got me deeper into reading books, which eventually got me into writing. But it just sort of put me on a timetable and forced me to, like, explore and figure out the things I actually was good at. In my brain, I had convinced myself that, yes, just like 14-year-old James Baldwin in Harlem, I needed a gimmick. I needed a thing to lift me up out of my circumstances, when, like, I didn't really, but I did need, some focus, and that helped me. And that's even before we get to, his insights on race and poverty and class and how they intersect and overlap. Like, he was one of the first people to talk about how expensive it is to be poor.
Yeah.
That's one of the James Baldwin lines that keeps popping up. And anybody that's, had to borrow money when they had a low credit score versus when they had to borrow money when they've had a high credit score can tell you James Baldwin was right about that years before all our lives just became like data points, and it became simpler to impose all these costs on poor people. He saw it, and so all those things together continue to make him just a really special writer, like an indispensable voice.
Mm-hmm. Do you try to model your prose after him at
No.
all? Big commas all the time. Commas, you pause and then you're like, I suppose,
No.
comma.
No.
I do, man. I love a good comma.
A lot of non-restrictive clauses, and
Yeah.
stuff in between the dashes. Yeah.
You did these, you use a lot of charming sentence fragments. Like, you'll do a thing where you kind of start a sentence midway through, just I'm trying to think of an example, but there's a bunch of them where you'll just kind of be instead of being she went upstairs, it'll just be went upstairs, that kind of thing. And it's I don't know if you're aware of that as a part of your prose style, but it really jumped out at me. It was this is good. I like this. It's
Well,
interesting stuff.
I don't know. You just you write the sentence you need to write, and a lot of it has to do with if I was younger, I would have tried to write like Baldwin. But it gets to a point where you write enough, you think enough about it, you got to write like you.
Mm.
And it takes a while to arrive at that voice, right? Just like any other person with a craft, whether it's a sport, music. If I go to YouTube and just sample the YouTube rap, it is a trillion people who sound exactly the same.
Yeah.
And they're all trying to sound like each other, or a whole bunch of people trying to sound like Drake. Right.
Too many.
But that's my point. There already is Drake. So
Yes.
I need to hear you sound like you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I had to get to the point in my life as a writer where I had to write enough to figure out how I wrote and write like me. So as much as Baldwin influenced me, I don't try to write like Baldwin, or I don't try to write like F. Scott Fitzgerald, who's we read him in English class in high school. He was one of the people I actually enjoyed reading. I don't try to
against the current.
Yeah, but I don't try to write like Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a phenomenal writer, but I don't try to write like him. All right, had to find my voice and write like me, and people that know me in real life, that talk to me, can read this and be like, that's Morgan, because his writing is not that different from his speaking. But
that's the goal, right?
Yes.
Whenever I'm mentoring emerging writers, as I so often do in my, successful.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
No, whenever I'm talking to other writers, I'll tell them your goal here is to sharpen your writing voice so that it is as smooth and natural to you as your speaking voice.
Yes.
It should just flow out of you. And sometimes I will liken it to your singing voice. And I'll be
yes.
Your singing
'Cause
voice.
To me, the best singers, when they sing, that is just an extension of their speaking voice.
Yeah.
And it's very, some people just have a very affected singing voice. You don't sing like you talk.
Yeah. British people. We're talking about British
Yes.
people. Yeah.
But a
The
lot
Spice
of really
Girls
good singers,
specifically.
you hear them sing, you hear them talk, and you can see where it's coming from. It's very natural, like walking to running. Yes, 100%.
Well, I'm going to ask this because I think it was your grandpa who said that your voice is not an instrument.
Yes.
Do you think that your writing voice is an instrument?
I mean, there are parallels between writing and music in the sense that they're about telling a story. The people who are good at it, again, have mastered the basics, but also know when to break the rules and which rules to break. Like to me, and then a lot of it has to do with personal taste. Like the jazz I like is from the mid 50s to the mid 60s. It's a lot of bebop influence, but still very bluesy, and they still play the song. There's still structure. Whereas a lot of people like late career Coltrane. I think a lot of other people claim to like late career Coltrane because they're embarrassed to say they don't like it because they think people will judge them. Yeah. But if you listen to it and say, this is noise, that's fine. And like a liberating moment for me, I was in the car with my grandpa, right? And I was probably 12. And I knew, like, whatever. There was never a time we did not know this man was a professional musician because in his apartment, he had this ginormous Steinway piano, like a full-sized Steinway piano. So I knew he was a jazz player, and he would listen to this jazz radio station in the car. We were going somewhere, but there was they played this record that I knew was John Coltrane, right? And at that point in my life, and I was in 7th grade probably, and I was playing tenor saxophone. I'm like, yeah, listen to John Coltrane, so I can learn stuff. Mm-hmm. But that, especially late career, it was just so abstract. And yeah, you can get with it if you have like a master's degree in music theory, you can see what they're doing, but like, that doesn't make it better necessarily. But anyway, so Grandpa's driving, and the song's on. I know it's Coltrane, and he's on, Coltrane's on, he's just going off on some wild run, this solo. And Grandpa he just turned the dial. Like, what is this shit? Turned it off. Like, ooh, Grandpa's shitting on John Coltrane. But it was like liberating because I was like, okay, here's a professional musician who hears this. It doesn't have to pretend to like it. And I'm not like insulting people who like, if you like it, cool, you like it. But like, you also do not have to pretend to like it because it doesn't have to be for everyone. Yeah. And that was like so instructive to me.
Like being given permission to say this John Coltrane song is shit is unbelievable. Like, cause it would have to be somebody who really knows his shit.
Yes, because if I say it, people are like, you just say that because you don't understand. Yeah,
right? Yeah. No,
you have to be more patient with the music. I've been listening to this song for 15 minutes. He still has not played the song. Take me back to his first album. I want to hear Blue Train. I want to hear I'm Old Fashioned. That I understand. Again, don't tell me I'm stupid because I don't want to hear this. Like, this is very abstract. It's not for everybody. Just accept it.
I love what just like a music lover you are, and it jumped out at me during the chapter. I think it's called Morgan versus Virginity. Okay. Where you're like in the bedroom, stuff's about to happen.
That's the 90-minute slow jam tape.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then you talk about the whole mixtape. Yes. I'm like, I think something's about to happen here. Sexy, but nope, you're just talking about music. Yes. It's just a mixtape.
Yes.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Well, the thing is. Honestly, all that chapter was just like, the only reason I included it is just because if I'm writing a story about growing up in the 90s and like people that know me, if I'd written a story, like a memoir without a chapter on slow jams, they'd have been like, are you okay?
Where's the slow jams? I flipped through this whole thing, I didn't see any discussion of the great slow jams of the 90s.
But that's what that was.
Well, I really liked it. I wanted to ask you about. Okay, let me rephrase this. So I don't want to say talk to me about.
Hit me with all the talk about questions.
I feel like people will ask me sometimes about like being a Black Canadian.
Yes.
Be like, what is it like to be a Black Canadian? And it's like, well, I can tell you what it's like to be me.
Yes.
I don't think that I can speak for other Black Canadians. And if you've read my book, you know that I really cannot. So, reading yours, it was like, oh, okay, well, there's like, yeah, right? I mean, your grandpa's like, he's able to say John Coltrane is shit. Like, you've got, like, you are like immersed in an actual Black life that I was kept away from. Yes. Right? And so, like, there were times that I read the book, like, I know that they're fighting a lot, but I'm jealous. Like, they're teaching you about Black history, and like your dad's giving you like good advice about what to do, and like punching out members of the Nation of Islam. It's like, no, like you are like immersed in this in a way that I was not. And so I feel like, you know, you probably have an answer to that same question that we get sometimes, like,
Which is?
what is it like to be a Black Canadian?
Well, for me, it was also different because, you know, where we grew up. I grew up in Mississauga, just outside of Toronto, just west of Toronto. You know, the 80s, 90s, like, so many of my Black peers were also first-generation Canadians, but most of them, you know, their folks are from Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, wherever. And so, like, for the people that like me, it didn't matter, you know, but every now and then you would run into people, Black people, who just, like, could not wrap their minds around the fact that there were Black people who existed that did not come from an island, which, I don't know, would you, so it would be, where are you from? I'm from Mississauga. Okay, where are your parents from? Chicago. What about their parents?
Yeah, you gotta ask again.
Chicago. What about their parents?
Yeah, no,
How
you
long do
know
you
what
wanna
I'm
do this?
trying to ask you.
Yeah, like, well, wait. I'd be like, they are from the United States, and it would be, well, they can't just be American. I'm like, of course they can just be American. Why can't they just be American? Like, would you go to Ghana and be like, Kofi, you can't just be from Ghana.
Just from here.
Right? Like,
explain how you got here.
right. And it was annoying back then, you know. Yeah, but I think about it now, and it's just, I also understand that these people were young too, and were Black and Canadian, and didn't quite know how to make Blackness and Canadianness get along. You know, because their parents came from countries where most of the people were Black. You get here, and most of the people are white, and what you were told is that Canadian is white, Black is something different. You're here trying to make sense of it. And so I don't really, like, judge people too harshly for having come at me like that back then, because they were also just confused and just trying to work some stuff out for themselves as well. But it is, it is a trip, you know, just sort of being this minority amongst minorities. But what I thought was really thrilling, what I thought was really cool is, like, most people had not seen African Americans, right? Even my friends, my Black friends, had not seen African Americans, right? So, like, somebody like my dad or my Uncle Ken, like, together, like, they were cool. As Stuart Scott used to say, cool is the other side of the pillow, these two, right? Uncle Ken always had his shades, toothpick, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Or, like, and my dad, they had, like, a man purse. Like, if you guys go back, go on, just Google, look up, like, Confunction, the band. That's how they dress. Like, that's how I picture my dad in the early 80s, you know, like leather jacket, dark blue jeans with the gold stitch down the side, like that. Low cut fro, this kind of thing, you know, just the way they talked. And so, like, my friends seeing these guys, like, they had only ever seen people like that on television.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So to see, like, my dad and my uncle in real life, that to them was like seeing a Lamborghini. You know what I mean? Like, that's something I see in magazines. That's something I see on TV. Here I got these two in front of me. They'd be at my football games, and my uncle especially, just talking shit, like, the whole time to the other team. Right. And my friends, like, they would be, like, in awe of these two, because they were people like that were very rare in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, I say this all the time too, I just really appreciate the fact that my parents raised me with this authentic, and my sisters too, you know, with this authentic, organic connection to Black American history and culture. So it's never something I've seen as, like, abstract.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not, I acknowledge my African American heritage person. You know, I'm like, no, this is actually part of who I am. This is stuff we lived growing up. And I really appreciate that, because, again, as my man Joel Anderson said in the blurb to this book, you know, he said, you know, it reads as a love note to Black American resilience. And I really felt like, and I say this all the time, as a Black American, whether you're there or here or any place else, like, the messaging you get from people who are not Black Americans is that Black Americans have no culture. You know, Ralph Wiley, another influential writer, wrote for Sports Illustrated, black writer, wrote for Sports Illustrated. You know, his career arc was sort of like ours, except I'm sure he made a lot more money because he was working for Sports Illustrated when they had money, and then he left and started writing books. And he had a book called Why Black People Tend to Shout. And one of the essays in the book was called Why Black People Have No Culture. And the reason he lays out in this essay why black people have no culture is because our culture is perpetually on loan, interest-free to the rest of the world. Yeah. And so for me, it was really important because I look around, I look at social media now, and how quickly white people co-opt black slang.
It's fast now.
Yes, because they have Twitter, and honestly, like, for a lot of white people, in the US especially, they have never heard black people converse like outside of, like unscripted, outside of a movie. Mm-hmm. But social media gives you a chance to eavesdrop. You get to see LeBron James tweet at Westbrook, and they're going back and forth in text the way they talk, and you can eavesdrop on that and pick up on the slang. Point is, a lot of people flatter black America by imitating black America, while at the same time telling black Americans they have no culture. And for me, it was very important to show black America some authentic, genuine love. Mm-hmm. You know, but that was something my parents sparked in me by the way they raised my sisters and me. And so that was something I put in the proposal, and I didn't prompt Joel to write that in the blurb, but I had put in the proposal, like, I want this book to be sort of a love letter to black America from across the border. So that was very important to me.
Writing a book that is a love letter to black America when you are a Canadian sports writer, it seems like a pretty ballsy thing to do. Did you get any pushback about that? Did you?
From whom?
Well, yeah, so the reason I ask is because if there is no pushback from people in my life, whenever I'm trying to talk about like issues that like are about race or about blackness, then I get the pushback that like it's just my mom's voice in my head, like, oh, you shouldn't do this, right? So like I wonder if like writing this book there was any anxiety about that, or because like your identity is so firm because like your relationship to blackness is not abstract.
Yeah.
If there was just
and the thing is, I just don't argue with people about this. Like, somebody come to me today and be like, I'm a black person from insert country here. You're American. You people have no culture. Hey, man, think what you want. I'm not fixing to argue with you about it. But I know I'm right and I know you're wrong. We're not gonna argue about. I ain't got time to argue with you about this. Think what you want.
I love it.
But you're gonna leave here and go back. You're gonna leave here and go read James Baldwin and come back and tell me we got no culture. Okay.
Yeah.
Do what you want to do.
I think that we're running out of time here. I want to ask you a million questions, but I also need to leave some space for the audience to ask questions, and that's now. So if anybody has a question here for Morgan, it's time. Right there in the back.
Hey folks, I really enjoyed both of your books, but I haven't finished yours yet, though I'm kind of disappointed in both of you as well, because you said The Fire Next Time. I would say the autobiography of Malcolm X is the book that changed me, but to each their own. I have a question for you, and I was wondering, I had the pleasure of growing up in Nova Scotia. I'm not from Nova Scotia, but I grew up there. And when you are in Toronto or these other places, people usually, as a black person, they will think, you, as you pointed out, you're from this other island. But I felt like Nova Scotia gave me a lot of grounding as far as, you can actually be from here,
Mm-hmm.
you can be yourself.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you could talk about maybe, I don't know if alienation is the right word, because I was in Toronto for 5 years, and, I'm not, I found it kind of difficult in a different way for folks who, need to claim the island, because Toronto, they kind of claim, but it's more difficult. I don't know if you understand my question. I guess not. Okay, let me
Yeah.
the kids there, everyone was trying to talk Jamaican pop
Yeah.
song. And even kids who were from Guyana and
Yes.
other islands.
Okay. Yep.
Even the Somalis.
Yep.
And so
Hey, go back there now as the white people too. But go ahead.
okay, yeah, and Chinese Canadians,
Yeah.
whatever. I found in Nova Scotia that
Yes.
grounding, okay, you actually can claim this state.
Yeah, but I mean, it's because so many of the black people in Nova Scotia have been there for so many generations. And the thing is, when black people from Nova Scotia, when you encounter them in the wild in Toronto, like when we were growing up, yeah, we had, listen, and often you can tell by the person's last name, right? If this person's last name is Beals or Cawley or Downey or Kane, right? Bishop, Cromwell, whatever, you'd meet these folks. And like, they'd be like, yeah, I'm Scotian, as opposed to just saying I am Canadian, right? Because still, as a black person, you still needed to have you had to signal where you were from before you came to Toronto, because if you just said Toronto, people would act like you did not exist or had no right to exist. So and that's why also when I talk about, growing up black in Canada with strong American roots, but these stories are also very particular to growing up in suburban Toronto, because how you play or display or claim your roots, that plays out differently, depending on what part of the country you're in. But like where we were, all anyone ever claimed in terms of an ethnic identity was where their folks came from. And so the Jamaicans would be like, I'm Jamaican, even though they were born here. The Trinis would be like, I'm Trini, even though they were born here. But then like the kids, Beals, Johnson, Kane, they'd be like, yeah, we're Scotian.
Just a quick follow-up. I would say, because in the beginning, and I have some Scotian family,
Mm-hmm.
and just the way you talk about the Joneses and all these last names, that is so much Scotia.
Yes.
And that was something I really enjoyed about your book. Send it to some friends.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I actually want to echo that. Like in the first chapter where you do that, you're talking about like all the last names, like the woman on the bus kind of trying to clock you.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, like if my last name was this, I'd be from here. If my last name was this, like, again, as someone from here who was raised so isolated, it's like, how does he know all that? Like how, like it was amazing to me to be able to kind of to actually trace people by their last name to the parts of Canada they're from, to the parts of the islands they're from. I'm also just now realizing that like Scotian is a black identity that gets claimed a 100%. Lot here. That's cool, man.
So like I have some neighbors, and the guy, I have not actually laid eyes on this person, but he has like some Nova Scotia flag boxing gloves hanging from his rearview mirror. I haven't seen him, but so I don't know if he's Nova Scotian or if he's Scotian. Do you see what I'm saying?
I love it.
Right?
And then just to end that one, why do you hate the autobiography of Malcolm X?
I read that right after I read The Fire Next Time. If you want to read a Malcolm X biography, Manning Marable. I want to say it's called...
The reinvention.
Yes.
Sweet. All right, I'm going to read that. It's a question right here.
It's okay.
We love prefacing. Take your time.
I am the reverse of you, Canadian born. And no, I never grew up. We never were asked where we were from
Mm-hmm.
until I came back to Canada. And all of a sudden in the 90s, well, where are you from? I'm Canadian. What do you mean you're Canadian? I am not a goddamn hyphenated Canadian. Although now I am American Canadian.
Yeah, there you go.
Two things. One, I'd like you to be a teacher of little kids for a while.
I ain't got the patience.
No, I know you do, but I want
Come on, man.
with the kids that the parents said to bunch of the kids. Just do that for a week, okay? Now, but the thing is, how my son, I am married into the Choctaw Nation,
Mm-hmm.
which you may not know that's from Oklahoma. They did the Trail of Tears.
Yes. So they're not from Oklahoma. They got sent to Oklahoma
Yes.
from further
That was
southeast.
here
Yes.
that they did. But the thing is, I cannot talk about the indigenous experience. My husband, deceased, my son, my grandson, all good. But I still have, and you know what he was brought up in? Dallas, Texas,
Mm.
where we live. And so I, when you talk about, white people, white people, white people, and I'm thinking, do you realize I'm sitting here and I'm white and you're saying these things about me and I don't think these things?
Oh, I didn't say anything about you.
I don't, no. It's a horrible thing because in Canada, since I've come back, it's the fight of who's the biggest victim. I mean, who deals with the most racism, and I just go friggin' crazy. But now I'm going to get to my question. You guys have perfect, perfect diction grammar, but I remember, in the 80s when I was teaching there in the States,
Uh-huh.
we had that thing, maybe not perfect, but anyway, you don't say me and my sisters, you say my sisters and I, but anyway.
I would say my sisters and me.
The thing about the black kids didn't want to have correct English.
I'm gonna stop you right there. Have you?
That's what we heard.
Okay, come.
But in my neighborhood,
Yeah.
they all spoke like my son. You know what I'm saying? With a Texas accent.
I will say this is something that comes up a lot for me here,
Yeah.
which is people will be like, "Oh, well, you don't sound black," and I'm like, "Okay, well, no, because I do, because this is what I look like and this is what I sound like,
Yeah.
so that's a way that I can sound." But then the other thing is like, no, I sound like where I'm from,
Yes.
right? So I don't know if that answers the question a little bit, but
No, it was that generation where they said that because everybody we knew, I mean, they had Texas accents.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I was the one that was made fun of, and nobody knew because they didn't know where this strange accent
Yeah.
was from. But it's just that we went through that period where it seemed people were telling me that black kids didn't want to have good grammar. Well, of course, I didn't teach them English. I taught them history.
Uh-huh.
I didn't give a damn, except when they were writing.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that problem. So you're saying, but then you were also saying everybody wants to talk like black people, but also in your neighborhood they wanted to talk like Jamaican and all of that. It's also confusing to me. Is it?
Yeah.
Another question, like you
What?
guys don't have that accent.
Which accent?
Yeah.
have you ever felt a pressure to sound more black?
Thank you. I thought you could say I was a bad teacher.
No.
No.
Like, I sound the way I sound.
Yeah.
Some people, like Canadians, think I sound American. Black Americans think I sound like sort of suburban. But I
Here.
just sound the way I sound.
Let me-
But like I don't like
Yeah.
my American black accent is nowhere near as strong as my dad's was, or as my Uncle Ken's is, or even my mom's. But again, there's not. I know there's not one way to sound black. And even within the United States, among African Americans, like somebody from D.C. has a different accent from. Listen, my dad and my uncle got different accents. They're from the same city, the west side of Chicago versus the south side of Chicago. You know what I'm saying? And so, again, I made the point in the book, like, repeatedly, what white people often deride as broken grammar. Black people, all you speak is slang, is actually just a dialect of English, and like with all kinds of sub-dialects.
Mm-hmm.
And so, no, I have not ever felt, because in Toronto, like sounding more black would mean sounding more Caribbean Canadian, and like
Yeah.
I could not fake that even if I wanted to. And so,
Drake
I talk
can
the-
fake it.
Yeah, I know Drake is very good at faking it, but I talk the way I
Why
talk.
can't you fake it, Drake? Why ain't you Drake?
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Do we have another question? Yes.
For Morgan, earlier on, Harrison had mentioned, for example, when the question comes up in terms of what's it like to be a black Canadian, for example. And Harrison, your response was saying, I can speak from my experience, but to speak on behalf of the entirety of my group, for example, could be a different story. And I think just as you start to touch on here, for example, even within those communities, based on the neighborhoods you might be from, the different regions, etc., there's so many disparities within these different groups to start with. Canadian,
Mhm.
for example, and in Mississauga, we have a huge community out there that are, culturally entirely different than, the Egyptian community out west, for example.
Right.
And like, there's so many, just I find within these cultures, just by generations having lived in
Mhm.
certain areas, the influences there. I'm curious, when you were writing your book, did you encounter like difficulties in terms of kind of disentangling all these different pieces when it comes to the cultural identity, and how do you approach it, I guess?
In terms of like cultural identity as a Black Canadian.
As a Black Canadian, as somebody from Chicago, as the many different facets to your background and the culture there?
Well, because one thing that this book does is it kind of blows up the border a little bit, right?
Yes.
There's that idea, right? Like, oh, there's Black Canadians, and like, oh, there's Black Americans, but like,
And then there's some people that are both.
yeah.
Yeah, and so was there difficulty disentangling? No, only because for me, like for my family, the border's just always been there, but we've just always lived our lives hopping back and forth across the border. And again, like for me, what was important in terms of telling our family story and just adding our story to this Black Canadian literature canon, right, is that there aren't a lot of people like us, but there are people like us. And these stories don't get told very often, and they're all fascinating stories, and they deserve to be, highlighted, preserved. And so when people think about Black Americans coming to Canada, the first thing we think is that they all came from the Underground Railroad, right? And so then we take Nova Scotia and we try to cram them into the Underground Railroad too, even though like those big drops of Black people they predate the Underground Railroad by several decades, right? By like 60 years. But that's the first thing we do, is try to flatten every group of Black Americans that ever came to Canada into this one group, cram everybody into that same template. But that framework doesn't make room for people who came after the Civil War. If you read a book called North of the Color Line, like that's what it talks about, Black Americans coming to Canada between the end of the Civil War and like the beginning of World War I. And it doesn't make room for like draft dodgers, like Vietnam War draft dodgers that used to come to Toronto. Like we talk a lot, at least I have been talking a lot in another work I was doing at a museum about Muhammad Ali fighting in Toronto, and one of the things he would have found in Toronto was a pretty vibrant community of draft dodgers who were like, yeah, we like you because you don't like the draft either. But, and it doesn't take into account like families like mine, people who just come across the border for, a few members at a time for like very specific reasons. And so, but there are people like that. Like when I grew up in Mississauga, yeah, like the vast majority of the Black kids I knew, their parents were from the islands. But you guys might remember a CFL player named Chuck Ely. Like, his family, they didn't live that far from mine. So like my sister was in daycare, with his youngest son. I played football with his son, played against his son. So we knew each other, and we all had siblings. We all knew each other. And then the Freeman family too. And so we knew each other. The Freemans are from DC. And so there was that little bit of community, but it was also like validation, like we're not the only ones out here. Your parents are like my parents, like they came to Canada essentially as Black people, leaving America to come to Canada to find the American dream, because that's what Canada promised us, right? Equality, opportunity, integration, blah, blah, blah. Like, does it deliver on that promise? To an extent. But like, that's the thing that unites these different groups of Black Americans who have come to Canada, is that Canada offered the promise of the thing that America also promised but never delivered. Hope that makes sense.
I love that answer. That was a good answer. There was a bit.
So I make this medium bucks, man.
There was a bit in your book where you talked about the kind of like the soft edges of Canadian racism and the plausible deniability, and that for me was like, oh, this dude knows. Like, it's a little different here, and people will be like, oh, well, there's no racism in Canada. And you're
Yes.
like, no, there is. I think maybe there's just as much, but it is like it's like a different flavor. Sometimes it feels like it's like sneakier.
Yes and no.
Is that
As
the
I say
right
this all
word?
the time because like Canadians will tell you that this is one thing I've heard too. Like, I prefer American racism because they're in your face
I've
about
heard
it.
that. No, you do not.
It's very privileged, right? On two fronts. One, just because in-your-face racism exists on the other side of the border does not mean that like the subtle microaggressions do not also exist. They all exist. All these forms of racism exist. Now, the people that I talk to sometimes are like, yeah, I prefer this in-your-face American racism. Listen, you guys, some of you read the book. My mom grew up in a white neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. And they had these redneck neighbors, like the minute they moved in, they saw a black family across the street and started throwing rocks at the house. Are you telling me you would rather have people throw rocks at your house than call you articulate or whatever the
They just like don't invite
microaggression
you
is?
to the PTA meeting.
Yeah, like, stop this. Like, I understand you're trying to make a point. You want to know where you stand, blah, 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 blah. But like, if I'm in a position where someone's dismissing me by calling me articulate, you know, oh, you speak so well, this kind of thing. No, I wasn't talking about you.
That's not.
I wasn't talking about you. I was not talking about you.
Yeah, no, we're not.
I was not talking about you.
Promise we're not talking about you. That's the thing that happens a lot, right? Like it's like, oh, you're very articulate.
Yes.
You're like, yeah, well, you know, it's I do write for a living.
Yeah,
so.
and it's dismissive, you know. But I would put up with that before I put up with somebody throwing rocks at my window.
The one thing I'll say though is like, yeah, I don't want anybody throwing rocks at my window, but I do hate when a thing happens that I know is racist.
Yes.
And then I have to like tell someone else or try to explain it, and then they're like, I don't know, you know, like, well, there was a thing, you know, there's a rule that you broke that I know it was selectively enforced just for you, but that rule still exists. You know, you're like, come on, like the plausible deniability factor is so frustrating. Like,
Yes.
please just validate and uphold my reality so that I can move forward and not have this fuzzy memory that I have to decide whether or not it happened. Like,
Yes.
it's frustrating. We have gone way over, I think.
We got one more
Are we
question.
done? But I
One more
want
question.
one more question right over here. You are our final question. Make it contentious.
Thank you. It's not my credential based on research. I appreciate the conversation, but sometimes I think people of color who create the questions or the conversation always revolves around one identity and that's race, which brings up the important question. But my question is actually about writing process. And just my curiosity, and I think maybe you both can answer that. What's in the writing process? How do you navigate those dynamics when you're talking about other people? Because you're all not just sharing your story, you're soliciting angles with other people, families, close people, people that you care about, people that you love. How did you navigate airing the laundry? Because, you know, like airing those things that might impact them or they might upset them. Did you have conflict? What was your process of
How did you navigate airing the dirty laundry of your family in this book called My Fighting Family, where everybody's fighting and feuding and there's grudges, fistfights, etc.?
One, you know, I just told my family I was writing the book. I didn't ask permission.
I love it.
Two, yeah, I had to collaborate like with my mom and my aunt just on a lot of like fact checking, but it was not like a collaborative process, mainly because the people in my family are very smart and outspoken and stubborn. And the risk you run is like always being pulled toward writing the story someone else would have written.
Yeah.
And so the thing you do is you write the story that you know is truthful from where you stood. And you understand the person standing next to you is going to see it a little bit differently. But if it's truthful, then, you know, the people around you, they can either get with the truth or not get with the truth. And so y'all call it dirty laundry. It's not, listen. If you read the book, like, you know, it's not just a simple like airing of grievances. You know, it's not just a cataloging of all these fights, because that would be boring, right? And so, you know, I touch on certain fights to make bigger points. I drill down on certain fights to make bigger points about our family, but then families in general. And so the feedback I get from a lot of people from a lot of different ethnic groups who have read the book is that reminds me of my family. So on the one hand, like, if you're writing a story like this and people in your family might say, oh, you made us look bad. But those same people would turn around and read another book that's just like your book about a different family and be like, ooh, I see my family in that book. And so as long as you're truthful to like the people, to the characters, so there are people that know my grandpa but don't know him like this and would read it and say, ooh, I didn't know he's like that. But there are gonna be a lot more people and be like, oh yeah, man, that tracks, you know. And then, you know, and there's gonna be, you know, factions within your family. You say you write about 4 different people and like, but you're very truthful about them. Say it's 4 different people and they're jerks, each in their own way. But like each of them has a faction of the family that's aligned with them. And so the one person's faction is gonna be like, yeah, that tracks, she's a jerk, yeah, he's a jerk, she's a jerk, yeah, yep. But my guy, no, that's exaggerated. He's not like that. It's not true. So as long as you are like faithful to like who these people actually were, right, and are, you know, and your family members, if they're being honest with themselves, they'll know.
Did you get any pushback from family?
Not pushback. Not everyone has read it, which
That sounds like family.
you know, and I can see why, because I don't want to see my dad portrayed like that. But like, you know, my mom has not read it yet. She's read the prologue, but my mom is not like most people's moms. You know, my mom, like in another life, my mom could have been Christine Brennan or Sally Jenkins or Jamel Hill. You know, like the stuff my mom emails me on Monday mornings about football, you could publish as a column. Or blazing hot takes on the Chicago Bears and what they need to do with their stadium, what they need to do with their quarterbacks, right? So at the same time, though, my mom is a very, 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 very harsh critic.
Right.
So if my mom goes on Goodreads and gives me more than 1.5 stars, like I'm winning.
All right, well, I will go on Goodreads and give you 5 stars.
Appreciate that.
4.5, because, you know, I'm from the humanities. You know, you A+, that's not something we do. We're done. This has been just a pleasure, Morgan. I have a million other questions for you, but I'm going to have to save them for later. Thank you guys all so much for coming. Just a huge hand for Morgan Campbell for his incredible new memoir. It's called My Fighting Family. It's right over there. Morgan is gonna stay right here, so if you buy one and then you want him to sign it, he has to sit in this chair until everybody leaves. So, you know, do that. And also my book's there. You can buy that, and you know, that'd be great for me because I don't have any money. Thank you guys so much for coming. You are dismissed.